Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our EHE Regional Learning Collaborative session on Grassroots Approaches to Ending the HIV Epidemic. My name is Elena Rosenberg-Carlson, and I'm the EHE Coordinator here at the UCLA Center for HIV Identification, Prevention, and Treatment Services, or CHIP. For those who are new to the Learning Collaborative, our purpose is to facilitate knowledge sharing and spark collaborative opportunities across California's 8 EHE Phase 1 jurisdictions to help accomplish our shared EHE goals. And we also welcome folks from outside these counties to join the sessions and learn together with us. So welcome to all of you today. In the chat, you should see an option to send a message to all panelists and attendees. Please use that option to introduce yourself to everyone by sharing your name, your affiliation, and your location. Next slide. I am very excited for today's session, which features 3 amazing organizations that will be sharing their grassroots strategies and approaches for addressing HIV and related conditions. We'll begin with their presentations, and then we'll spend the last 25 minutes or so on panel discussion and open Q&A. As always, please feel free to submit questions at any time during the session using the Q&A function on your Zoom control panel. We'll use the Q&A function, which is the one with the 2 speech bubbles, to collect and respond to questions throughout the session and during the live Q&A at the end. We'll also keep the chat function, so the one with just 1 speech bubble, open in case you'd like to share any comments or resources with the group. And I want to note that we are recording the session and we'll post the recording and slides on our EHE Regional Response webpage within the next week. Next slide. So now I'm delighted to introduce Chloe Rios Wyatt, who is the CEO and President of Alianza Trans Latinx. Welcome, Chloe.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the introduction. I just want to start off by saying that I use female pronouns. And yes, as you mentioned, I'm currently leading the work at Alianza Trans Latinx. I want to start my presentation this morning by saying that while there are several organizations in Orange County that serves the LGBTQ community, Alianza Trans Latinx is currently the only organization that exclusively focuses on serving transgender and gender nonconforming people. And we are uniquely positioned to address the community's most important needs because our leadership consists of transgender women of color. We have lived experiences being a part of the community we serve, and because we have a huge drive to serve our community. And this is what really makes our team one of the strongest assets of Alianza Trans Latinx. Next slide, please. I want to start with our mission, which is to protect, defend, and advocate for the needs and the rights of the transgender and gender nonconforming community, as well as other marginalized communities. We uplift our community members through education, community empowerment, and social justice so that we can ensure and foster community inclusion and unity, especially within the communities of color. Our organization was founded by 4 transgender Latinx women, Cynthia Espinosa, Rachel Pozos, Leslie Jimenez, and myself, Chloe Rios Wyatt. We have a 501c3 status, but we are also fiscally sponsored by the Trans Latina Coalition, which is a national advocacy organization based in Los Angeles, California. Through our connection to the community, our organization leadership curates services and programs that respond and pivot to our community needs. Our organization is focused in creating programs and services that are specifically tailored to fit the needs of the TGNC community, but we also mobilize our community in statewide and national movements. Next slide, please. In addressing HIV and other related conditions, Alianza Trans Latinx strategy is very simple. 1, we work with an equity lens, which means that we understand that what our community needs to lead the designing and implementation of our programs and strategies aimed at serving and engaging transgender and gender nonconforming people. We also provide the necessary tools to transgender people to engage in community mobilization and organization. Number two, we provide an array of services which include health education, linkage to care, gender marker and name change supporting services, referrals to medical services, and a safe space along with career supportive services through our drop-in center that is open to our community and which remained open during the COVID-19 pandemic. And third, with strong ties to local, state, and national campaigns, Alianza Trans Latinx also connects local actions to broader movements around housing, immigration, and transgender justice. These strategies have been really effective for us because for the first time in decades, Alianza Trans Latinx is helping improve the quality of life of transgender people in Orange County. And as a community cornerstone, we are working to lessen the burden of systematic racism and multiple forms of oppression against TGNC people of color, inclusive of sex workers, undocumented individuals, TGNC people living with HIV, and low-income individuals. And through our direct services provision, we contribute to achieving reproductive and gender justice for the local community. Next slide, please. So let me go a little bit more into detail about each one of the services that we provide at Alianza Trans Latinx. These programs and services, as I have mentioned before, are helping our organization to foster community inclusion, unity, and empower TGNC people of color to become agents of change, while at the same time addressing both ending the HIV and the COVID-19 pandemic. During the first months of being established, Alianza Trans Latinx supported TGNC people to obtain training in name and gender marker change documentation and preparation. Through this engagement, we were able to help over 70 TGNC community members update their legal documentations during the first 12 months of being established. Our volunteers are also helping these community members navigate through the challenging task of updating all their legal documentation, such as Social Security numbers, DMV documents, bank information, and other utilities. Additionally, our volunteer staff is helping community members develop cover letters, resumes, to try and find jobs in the community, especially during these difficult times when the majority of our participants have faced job displacement due to the pandemic. Alianza Trans Latinx provides virtual educational workshops where TGNC people can find information related to HIV prevention and transmission, transgender surgeries, COVID resources, and other TGNC folks with similar experiences, as well as much needed encouragement. And because our educational virtual workshops are streamed via social media, we help people understand the challenges TGNC people face, while at the same time, we build bridges with community allies. Next slide, please. In a survey conducted by Alianza Trans Latinx in April of 2020, 26.1% of our participants reported having felt hungry at least one time during the COVID-19 pandemic. So as a result, every Wednesday, we provide hot plates of food in the afternoon, which is currently serving over 50 people through this emergency service on a weekly basis. And this service also alleviates some of the struggles our community faces with the dramatic rise of the food prices, the unemployment levels. We call it Miércoles de Comida, or Food on Wednesdays. And it has also become more of a weekly support group for people, TGNC people of color who have been excluded from culturally designed services in Orange County in the past. This group has also begun to address sexual and health education through in-person presentations and collaborations with Gilead, the Orange County Healthcare Agency, through which we've imparted workshops on PrEP and PEP, HIV presentation and transmission, and other information on how to cope with the pandemic for people living with HIV. Next slide, please. On Tuesdays, our office provides the space for community members to gather and design jewelry. The purpose of this is to teach other community members to design and sell these jewelry items so that we can have other income sources. Promoting this type of workshop is enabling our community to find ways of expanding their creativity and their business capacity. Next slide, please. According to the American Psychological Association, research shows that the transgender and gender diverse youth are experiencing substantial negative mental health impacts from the pandemic, more so than cisgender youth. In Orange County, particularly, transgender and gender nonconforming communities of color, which include, again, those living with HIV, individuals engaging in survival sex work, and the houseless were severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. As a result, the need to access basic services such as mental health services was exacerbated. Similarly, the Williams Institute also states that LGBT people of color were over twice as likely to report having less ability to pay for household goods, and over 3 times more likely to report having less ability to pay for their rent or their mortgage than their non-LGBT white counterparts. These life stressors dramatically increase the levels of tension and anxiety in members of our community. So to help alleviate some of the mental health disparities amid the COVID-19 pandemic, Alianza Trans Latinx began imparting outdoor free ballet folklorico classes. Our aim is to utilize the arts as a form of stress coping method for our community during ambiguous times. The beauty about this group is that it is not just helping our participants cope with the isolation brought by the COVID-19, but also offering the opportunity for folks to enrich and inspire others through dance. Through our ballet folklorico classes, our organization offers members of our community who have never been exposed to dance the opportunity of learning simple dance moves. At the same time, the ability to foster leadership among our community. The group has been meeting once a week for over a year now to practice choreography. What is more, the group has been invited to participate in different community events, both virtually and in person. If you can go to the next slide, please. In helping ending the HIV epidemic, it is important to also include services for our community, which focuses on providing stability in lives. It is important to get tested regularly for HIV, but it is also important to have shelter, food, and economic stability. Alianza Trans Latinx helps hard-hit TGNC people of color reduce high-risk sexual behaviors by helping them access basic resources. Our aim is to eliminate some of these barriers, which can increase the chances of our participants to engage in high-risk behavior in exchange of shelter, food, or money. Every Friday, our volunteer staff helps distribute boxes of pantry food to our community who is unable to obtain groceries. And once a week, our volunteer staff also provides condoms, lubricants, referrals to local health clinics for testing through our community outreach, which is held from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. at local streets and clubs, as well as bars. Next slide, please. As a newly established organization, we've experienced our fair share of challenges. Without a budget allocated for grant writing, our support, or grant database, we have very little access to programmatic funding opportunities. In addition to the funding challenges, we are in one of the most politically conservative counties in Southern California, making it specifically challenging to garner community support for individual donors. This also creates a hostile environment for the organization to operate in and for the community we serve. Despite these challenges, we raised enough funds to launch needed programs and increase the support for the community overall. However, and needless to say, we need more support to continue doing the critical and important work with our local TGNC community. Next slide, please. Before I briefly touch on annual community events, I want to acknowledge that Alianza Trans Latinx currently has an all-volunteer staff comprised of the founding members of the organization. For the past year, our focus has been to fully support the programmatic work that is crucial for our community. Therefore, all of the grant funds and donations have gone directly to covering the cost of the programs and so that means that our staff has been unable to collect a salary for the hard work that we perform on a daily basis. Next slide, please. In 2020, we held the first Thanksgiving dinner to over 60 TGNC community members in lieu of traditional Thanksgiving dinner. As members of the transgender community, we often are shifted to the margins. ATL, or Alianza Trans Latinx, is familiar with these challenges, and so that's why we implement Our work and those challenges permeate through our community and directly affect our organization. Our leadership, therefore, actively listens and responds to the client's base needs, leading in the provision of the services for our community. And so here is what came out of that, the Thanksgiving dinner. Next slide, please. There are some photos. These are some photos of our past community resource health fairs. These community health fairs are intended to promote all of the services being provided at local community organizations so that our community members can take advantage of these wonderful programs and services. Here, participants can learn about where to find testing services for HIV and STD, for example, but also where to find services like immigration services or COVID-19 resources. Next slide, please. Alianza Trans Latinx commemorates Transgender Day of Remembrance and Visibility, which are important days to highlight the resiliency of our community, but also remember those trans siblings who have lost their lives due to systematic racism, hate, violence, and transphobia. Be on the lookout for March and November, as these are important months for our community. Next slide, please. Now that I've touched on annual community events, let me also share with you a special event we held back in April of this year, I'm sorry. So next slide, please. As new research from the Williams Institute shows that people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer, especially people of color, are more vulnerable to contracting COVID-19 and more likely to have underlying conditions that could make them severely ill. Many LGBTQ people, particularly transgender and gender nonconforming, have access barriers or trust barriers when it comes to accessing COVID-19 vaccines in Orange County. This is often due to the history of the discrimination within the medical system and the lack of safe, affirming spaces for transgender people to receive medical services in this county. In response to the disproportionate impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our community, Alianza Trans Latinx co-led a mobile vaccination clinic event with our community partner, Orange County Healthcare Agency. The event was designed to foster an inclusive space free of discrimination, judgment, to ensure that TGNC residents feel safe and comfortable receiving the vaccine. From registration to community to vaccination to the observation phase, we took intentional steps to create an affirming and welcoming space. Thanks to our in-person and online outreach, we were able to administer over 250 vaccines to community residents. Next slide, please. With that, I just want to thank you so much for the space, for allowing us to not only present on the work that Alianza Trans Latinx, but to also share how important it is to support transgender leadership, because our community remains as one of the most critical when it comes to being impacted by the HIV global pandemic. So thank you so much, and I hope this has been helpful for everyone.
Thank you so much, Chloe. Before we move to our next presenter, I just really want to emphasize that Alianza Trans Latinx is doing all of this incredible work as volunteers. And I know that you're seeking partnership and funding opportunities to really help support your work and ensure that your clients get all of the services that they need. So, as a learning collaborative community, if there's anyone here on the line who's interested in partnering with Chloe and her team, please do reach out either, through the chat or after the session. Would love to see some collaborations come of this as well. So thank you so much again, Chloe. And now I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Gerald Garth, Director of Operations and Programs, and Jamar Moore, EHE Program Manager from the Arming Minorities Against Addiction and Disease, or AHMAD Institute. Good morning, Gerald and Jamar.
Good morning, Elena. Thank you very much. And thank you, Chloe, for that dynamic presentation. So yes, as Elena mentioned, my name is Gerald Garth with the AHMAD Institute, and I'll be co-presenting today with Jamar Moore.
Hello, everyone.
Yes, next slide, please. So we've already introduced ourselves, so we'll move forward. In today's presentation, we'll look at who we are as an organization, cover our mission, and highlight our team, We'll look specifically at our programs and then the strategies and approaches that inform those programs, as well as some of the lessons we've learned and how partners and other agencies might be able to apply to their own work, and then questions and answers at the very end. Next slide, please. We'll have Jamar.
Okay. AHMAD mission is that AHMAD facilitates personalized individual access to programs and services that foster safe and supportive, healthy environments for people to live, learn, and develop to their fullest potential. It's very important to the work that we do and for who we are as an organization to show up in spaces as our authentic selves and to help facilitate these programs that resemble people that look, act, and live the way that we do. Next slide, please. One of my favorite things is that our founder and executive director, who is Dr. Carl Highshaw, is really important to him that AHMAD, what AHMAD does is near and dear to the organizers, because this is where we spend our daily lives. This is where we sleep, shop, socialize, and we also serve. We are not going into South LA, we are already here. Being in such a dynamic area in the city, which is South Los Angeles, we have the opportunity to work with people that look like us in the Black and Brown communities, and we get to spend our daily lives there. We are not just showing up in South LA, we are there, and I would also like to say that we are there to stay. Next slide, please.
And this is just a snapshot of some of our team members. The top row being a number of our leadership team, and again, just a handful of the great individuals who keep AHMAD great. Next, please. And so now we'll go into a number of AHMAD's programs. As Jamar said, one thing that's integral to the success of our programs is the program designs. And so we'll move through some of those pretty quickly, but also take out some time to highlight some of those specific points as well. Next, please. So our programs, as listed, we have an ambassador program, which is designed to center individuals of lived experience across programs. Our Fierce, Fabulous, and Free program, or F3, is our young, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, plus men that's designed to build leadership, build brotherhood and community, but also connect individuals to HIV testing, care, treatment, essential services, and also community activities. One of our foundational programs is our prevention navigation efforts, where we work intersectionally to provide care, services, and linkage to care through client-centered, peer-based approaches. Our community efforts center individuals who are experiencing or at risk of substance use and abuse, and we provide coaching, counseling, support as it relates to recovery and substance use. Our House of Resiliency is actually our flagship house. It's the first of our housing properties. This one is designed to address the unique needs of young gay, bisexual men. Our Project ROAR, an acronym for Restoration, Outreach, Advocacy, and Resiliency, is our youth and young adult diversion project that's designed to provide opportunities, events, outreach, and services to youth and young adults, particularly Black and Latinx individuals, as an opportunity to prevent justice involvement or to provide diversion alternatives. Also, we have a very robust reentry department. A number of those programs are able to provide housing placement, housing subsidy, employment support, peer navigation and support, essential services such as food, clothes, behavioral health, and a number of intersectional needs that speak specifically to the justice involved, reentry, or criminal justice system involved individuals. Our Policy Alliance is a team that looks specifically at addressing policy and advocacy needs that directly and disproportionately impact Black communities. Our most recent project is our Tobacco and Control project that looks at how are we shifting and monitoring policies that relate to secondhand smoke. For Our Own Protection is one of our projects as well that looked at how do we enhance, build, and amplify policy and advocacy engagement among impacted communities, particularly Black gay and bisexual men and Black transgender women. Another of our programs is our Black LGBTQ plus mental health task force, or Black, which is our activism group that looks at working with the unique mental and emotional health needs of these communities as well. And then one of our newest projects is our Ending the HIV Epidemic project that Jamar leads, and will go into more detail on some of the intersections of these. Next, please. So Resilient Solutions is another one of our great projects that looks at, most of our projects, actually all of our projects are designed with a care team continuum. And so each of our teams by design is made up of a care team that provides intersectional care and services for impacted communities. So our Resilient Solutions project is our substance use and support project. Not only does this project provide substance use and recovery support, it looks intersectionally at providing mental and behavioral health, as well as housing placement and stability. And so again, so much of the disproportion that we see as it relates to HIV care and care at large is looking at how are we addressing intersectional needs. And so Resilient Solutions by design is made up of a care team that provides substance support, substance and recovery support, as well as mental health support as part of recovery and prevention efforts. Next slide. I mentioned F3. F3 also is designed uniquely to address the specific experiences of Black LGBTQ plus youth and young adults. We recognize that so much of the need within the Black community is around building affirming and celebratory spaces of the culture. And so F3 is led by young people who represent the community, are strong, popular opinion leaders and leaders within their own right that build programs, activities, and events that center health and wellness. One of our offsprings of F3 is Wellness Wednesday, which is a series of wellness engagement workshops, conversations, and other activities that look at HIV care and treatment, sexual health, mental health, community building, access to employment and education. And again, looking at how does building self-esteem build self-efficacy. Next slide, please. So the House of Resiliency, as we mentioned, or as we informally call it, Big Mama's House, also centers the culture of the Black experiences as it relates to providing care and services for Black LGBTQ plus individuals. And so as is traditional with the Black community, Big Mama, the term Big Mama really centers and celebrates the sense of community that many individuals find paramount to their success. And so that team is run by, as is presented here, Kenneth Martin, our manager of housing services, as well as his team of housing navigators to not only provide housing placement, but to build housing care planning, life skills and employment and job readiness, there's stabilization through behavior and mental health services, ongoing client-centered care coordination, as well as connection to our recovery services and our other essential services as well. And one thing too, again, that has been paramount to the success of the House of Resiliency has been centering the culture and what we call having participants in the driver's seat of their own care. And so part of the design is that as part of that care planning, program participants are actively working with our care team to provide stabilization. Next, please. The Reclaiming Innocence is also one of our multi-tiered projects that provides services to formerly incarcerated individuals. And so this care team is made up of housing support, behavioral and mental health support, and peer navigation. And so this team works as, again, a coordinated unit to help support individuals through a variety of program housing placement options. We have through this program a subsidy support leg of the work in which we're able to provide for those who qualify temporary services, transitional services, excuse me, permanent placement, and what we call flex. So that is an opportunity for us to help individuals who might be in more urgent need as they transition and build their care plan with the team. Next, please. And so many folks might not know, but AHMAD was founded as a recovery agency. And so the care coordinated efforts in which our programs are built began looking at what are the, again, intersectional needs as it relates to care. And so, we consider it a responsibility to, as we look at HIV, what else needs to be addressed and supported as we look to fold people into treatment, care, services, and education. Next slide. And Jamar, you're muted.
Thank you. Okay, so I know that you enjoyed learning what AHMAD does in some of our programs. And so now we would like to spend time talking about how to address HIV and intersectional disparities. Next slide, please. What we are doing is looking at our prioritized community, our stakeholder groups, and those, as you can see, are our youth and young adults that's between the ages of 12 to 29, Black and African American, Latinx, transgender persons, gay and bisexual men, substance abusers and users, and people living with HIV. We believe that in the majority of our programs that we try to stay very centered on our prioritized communities. And by doing this, this is how we are helping to serve our communities, but also this is a way that we get a chance to help address many of the HIV stigmas and different things that goes around with addressing HIV. Next slide, please. Part of this program, our goals we have is this to empower community members to advance HIV-related projects, utilizing, as Gerald and we've said many times, a community-led approach. We increase knowledge and awareness among LAC communities of HIV and HIV-related issues, including populations disproportionately affected by HIV and AIDS. Our third point would be to develop partnerships with organizations and businesses to support our EHE efforts. And D would be to reduce HIV stigma among Los Angeles County residents. Next slide, please.
So we'll move further, thank you, Jamar, into some of our grassroots strategies and approaches at the AHMAD Institute. Next, please. So a strategy that, again, is paramount to all of our programs and the success of our organizational work is efficiently providing peer-based resources and linked referral services. And so all of our efforts and programs has a very intentional peer-based component, be it from incentivized participants, staff, community advisory groups. There's always some representation of the peer-based experience represented in all of our services and referrals. And that is also included through staff that represents our community. The intentionality of staffing, leadership development, and providing opportunities as it relates to our communities is very, very important, not only to leadership, but to our organization at large. One thing that's really important to the organization and particularly important to Carl, our founder, is that we see lived experience as valuable or even more valuable than formal education. I say often that we are the experts of our own experience. And so when we look at providing care, services, programs, or even insight, we have to look at lived experience as a valuable part of building any effective programs. And then thirdly, creating access to education, training, and opportunities. And so when we look at individuals who have moved through our space as volunteers or program participants, or just very passionate stakeholders, and how are we aligning individuals to long-term opportunities is a strategy, particularly as it relates to health and wellness services, that again is very key, not only to engagement, but retention. Next, please. Also looking at specialized counseling and case management services. So I mentioned with the snapshot of our programs, looking at intersectional needs and the ongoing need for care and services as it relates to wraparound. And so when we look at addressing HIV, it's impossible to look at HIV, particularly for the most impacted communities, without looking at housing also, without looking at substance use and abuse also, without looking at trauma and racism and a number of the things that impact if and how an individual engages in care and services. And so having those specialized services that center the experience, that center individuals' senses of self, but then it also affirm and celebrate the culture is very key. So those strength-based programs and services, looking at client-centered care teams, that being that there should be a voice of lived experience from program pre-implementation all the way through to evaluation. And then also, again, intersectional care and needs, that being to look at moving the needle, the dial on HIV, we have to look at what else needs to be moving also. Next, please. Jamar, do you want to take this?
Sure. And one of our other strategies here is work in partnership with full spectrum of service providers to maximize available community support. As just said, we really believe in the wraparound service care planning, which starts from the beginning of our programs and in all the way through our evaluation. Our client-centered care. Most folks in Black and Brown communities have experienced some kind of phobia in healthcare. So we really dive into mistrust and trying to make sure that our clients are centered, that they're able to navigate and speak for themselves, and that we're have a diverse program of leadership and development to help with those. We also have culturally affirming evidence-based interventions and practices. Again, we believe that culturally we bring a lot to the table if we have someone listening. And so at AHMAD, we really do listen to our clients. We listen to what is culturally relevant and affirming, that's supportive to help folks with HIV move from where they are to the many spots and services that they may need. And then our internal community-based participatory research. And so we use research and our data that really support the community-based and peer-led organization and models. Next slide, please.
And so overall, when we look at our approaches as it relates to engaging community, AHMAD hosts programs, services, events, and activities that center, and I'd say also celebrate and amplify the uniqueness and richness of the Black LGBTQ+ and South LA experiences. One thing that Carl says often is that we are South LA on purpose, and that we are Black on purpose, and that we are LGBTQ+ on purpose. So as we're building our programs as it relates to health and wellness and care, we should be looking at the intentionality on how we build all of those pieces as part of our approach and design. And then also HIV prevention, treatment, and education that centers lived experience as well. And as part of that, as we build care teams and the structures that support care, we have to remember that lived experience is a vital part of the success in those programs. Next, please. And one thing that is also very, very key to AHMAD is our measures. And so as we are building our programs, folding in innovation, engaging community, we always build out our efforts to capture and measure at least one of the following. So increase in education. With groups such as our F3 Wellness Wednesdays series, within our Reclaiming Innocence project, we have a series called In Search of Me that's designed to build life skills and wellness practices. Within our Resilient Solutions project, we have a new initiative that has launched recently called Free at Last that connects individuals to not only care and services, but culturally affirming, safe, and healthy opportunities to garner access to care, but also build efficacy and education, and a host of other projects in which we fold in an effort that is designed to, one, increase education, two, shift attitudes and beliefs that could be centered around stigma, access, as Jamar mentioned, some of the phobias and disparities that individuals experience, et cetera. We're also designing our programs to address barriers that could be access barriers, education barriers, insurance barriers, and a host of other barriers that impact health and wellness. Change behaviors, as we know, is very, very key in all of our programs. And then also the participant experience is a measure that we take very, very important. Next, please. Oh, Jamar.
I would just like to add, I saw in the chat box, Kevin, thank you for your question. There are many different barriers, especially which is, we use your example was with tobacco that affects folks with HIV. And so with this, we really do look at addressing barriers and how to overcome and to be able to help folks move forward. Back to you, Gerald.
Sure. And speaking, to barriers too, thank you, Kevin. It's also looking structurally. A lot of times too, we looked at our first measure around increasing education. A lot of times people don't know sort of the structures that are involved. So particularly on our tobacco project, a major part of our efforts is around policy record review. And so a lot of impacted communities have no idea sort of what's happening on the policy side and how it impacts them. And so by increasing education, access, and opportunities, we not only build advocates and advocacy, but by design are addressing those structural barriers. So that was a great question. So lessons learned is that community-based initiatives that center the whole person are paramount. Chloe shared a lot of great examples, even in her work with ATL, around sort of looking at how are we centering the whole person. And so we at AHMAD are always looking at that as well. Community-focused engagement is very, very key also. So as I mentioned, not only are we building programs for our community, but building programs with our community. So we should be looking organizationally at how are we intentionally engaging our communities from beginning all the way through. Again, also looking at lived experience from hiring, recruitment, engagement, retention, evaluation, and repeat. I've seen in my experience that oftentimes folks of lived experience or sort of individuals who might not be traditional candidates or sort of beholden to, volunteer spaces or community outreach or, health workers, which are great, but we as leaders should be looking at how are we building leadership pipeline opportunities for individuals as well. Also being open to innovation. One thing, and we didn't speak to any of the photos that were included, but all of those were photos from our activities and activations that really were centered and birthed through the innovation and experience of our team, as well as our communities. And so we know, again, to quote, we are the experts of our own experience, that might be some non-traditional opportunities to engage community in a way that traditional CBOs might not have ever seen. Also intersectional access to education. So when we look at, and resources, so when we look at what does health and wellness mean, there's more than one answer to that. So we should be including our community and impacted communities to be able to access those and speak to those. Looking at treatment as prevention through a cultural lens. So that is a necessary component as it relates to, again, how are we intentionally engaging our program participants and stakeholders. And then lastly, culture is key. We talk about what keeps people around. I say this often too, is that when we talk about diversity and inclusion, inclusion is a feeling. And so we should be looking at what feeling are we creating for folks as it relates to culture through messaging, marketing, materials, leadership, management, and so forth. Next slide. And so this is our team, at least our team has actually grown since then, but a snapshot of our team. And Jamar and I thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure most of you have many questions, and I even saw some things about hiring opportunities. Please feel
Yes.
free to visit us on Facebook and our IG, but definitely our website, which is at www.ahmad.org, where you can find out more information about our programs, our services, and some of those hiring opportunities. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. I will be sure to send out those links as well to everyone after the session, to your website and social media accounts. I also just really wanted to highlight the quote that you shared early on from Carl Highshaw, which stated, "What AHMAD does is near and dear to the organizers because this is where we spend our daily lives. This is where we sleep, shop, socialize, and serve. We're not going into South LA, we're already here." And then I know Jamar added, "We're here to stay." And I just think that really speaks to the unique power of grassroots approaches and just the fantastic community-driven work that you shared with us. So thank you both again.
Thank you, Elena.
And thank you, thank you. Now I'm excited to introduce our final speaker, Richard Zaldivar, who is the founder and executive director of the Wallace Memorias. Thanks for joining us, Richard.
Thank you, Elena, and good morning to all of you, wherever you may be. It's a pleasure to be here on this panel discussion with all of you, and when Elena calls me, I always respond. And so it's really a great pleasure to be part of this panel discussion. You know, I think that I am the founder. The organization is going on 28 years. When I founded the organization, I had no clue I had some clue of how organizations ran. My past life, I worked in government and politics. So when I entered into this organization and started it, shared my dream, I had a lot of connections already, which was a great advantage for me. The Wallace Memorias is not just about saving people's lives, but it's about transforming a community. And that's what's really key and important. Next slide. The Wallace Memorias is a community health and wellness organization dedicated to serving Latino, LGBTQ, and other underserved populations through advocacy, education, and building the next generation of leadership. I want to share with you a video that we have on our website, and it's also housed here in our main office in downtown. Next slide. Thank you. Next slide. You know, back then, as much as today, we in the Latino community still have to fight for our fair share of services and funding for programs. You know, I started the organization because my best friend shared with me that he was HIV positive. And that was back in 1989. And it still hits me today because I remember his face of fear and isolation and rejection. And there was very little being done in the Latino community around HIV/AIDS. And what was being done was only those communities, those folks who spoke Spanish only. And so I thought about, how do I bring my knowledge to the table and create something that our community can take ownership in? Because there was still a perception back then, as it is still in many parts of our community, that HIV/AIDS only happens in West Hollywood. And so I think our approach from a bottom up was extremely important to the success of the organization today. I shared the AIDS Monument is the foundation of all of our programming. It is there that we built a grassroots movement to empower our queer community at that time, as of today, to take ownership in their lives, in their struggles, in their journey, and in their own community. Early on, we brought different folks together from the community, primarily from the Latino community, the elected officials, labor leaders, faith-based leaders, members of the gay and lesbian community were there, clinics. They all came forward and said, we want to support your dream, your vision. But as I started working in this project and building the organization, we hired some folks on staff, and as more people bought into the dream, it became their project. They built the monument. The murals that you see in that monument were painted by muralists from our community. The whole process was empowered by local community folks. Money raised from that monument came from the state of California and the city of Los Angeles. And in order to get that funding, we had to work the community and lobby and advocate for those funds. Those funds came out of general funds, not HIV funds. Back then, as we started building the AIDS Monument, we had people in the AIDS community that came after us and attacked us. They were threatened that we were going to take away their HIV funding. And so we had to reassure people, this is not HIV funding, this is general dollars. But in order to get that monument funded, we had to work the system. So in the state of California, we brought in community members that helped us organize an advocacy campaign where we contacted every member of the state legislature to help support that bill that was introduced to the California State Assembly. It passed the Senate, and it went on to be signed by Governor Gray Davis. Same thing happened in the city of Los Angeles. It's the Wall Las Memorias is built by the community. It's the only publicly funded AIDS monuments in the country. It's important for us, as we look at our programming, that we look at the AIDS Monument as an example. The AIDS Monument is a place where people could remember their lives of those who were lost to AIDS, family members and loved ones. But more important of all, it's a teaching tool that we can do whatever we want to do in our community if we come together and we build a foundation of love and respect and education. So as I shared my vision, which was to build a monument to those who passed from AIDS, to bring dignity to the individual and help loved ones heal from their loss, the monument would bring acceptance, pride, and relevance. This was a total grassroots approach. In my past life, I worked in politics. I ran some campaigns. So I know how to organize neighborhoods. And I brought that tool to start this organization. We reached out to my existing contacts in community, government, politics. I became a leading advocate for my dream. And sometimes as a leading advocate, I have to tell you, it was very lonely because you're out there with this vision and people are going, what? You want to build a monument? Why? Why do people with AIDS deserve a monument? We had some opposition and some from the political right who came after us and threatened to file a lawsuit with the city of Los Angeles because they didn't want gay people prancing around in the park. I was also called out by then Oliver North on his radio show and wanted me to come and talk to him about why we're building an AIDS monument in the park and using public funds. So I shared my dream with influencers and placed them on committees. I leveraged their support to garner additional support. We reached out to respected cultural community-based organizations, leaders to recruit endorsements such as Catholic priests, clergy, elected officials, labor leaders, Latino celebrities, and sports leaders. You know, we are taught, because the way we receive funding from government, that our focus should be is to focus in and educate, test, engage our community, our LGBT community, and get them into services, get them into PrEP. Those funds focus on the individual. You can't do a lot of sustaining behavioral change if our community is homophobic, uneducated, they disowned our people, when our community is depressed, when our community is unemployed. And so our HIV prevention operation here at the Wall Las Memorias is not, you know, looking at individual based as much as is looking as the entire community. That's what's really important. And I want to say what's really important for us, because as Latinos, we are so family oriented that, you know, we could know, we might know that our father and mother are homophobic, but we stay quiet and we'll go to the other side of town to go party and hang out with friends. And so, but it's hard for us because we don't move far away from home. We stay close to our parents, particularly mothers. And so it's important that we get as many of our community members engaged as possible. One last thing I want to say before I leave this slide, and I started out this project. People would say, how are you going to build this? How are you going to get how are you going to get the message out about HIV/AIDS and about the gay and lesbian community and the bisexual community and transgender that are at risk? Early on, the first organization I went to were the Mothers of East LA. And they were a very traditional group. They were an environmental group. They helped organize the east side of LA to fight a possible prison in downtown Los Angeles. And these mothers represented 40 Catholic churches throughout the east side of Los Angeles. And so early on, we went to them and I asked for their support. And it was overwhelmingly approved, the whole concept of the AIDS monument. That support assisted us in carrying out our message and solidifying our project throughout our community. Next slide, please. So as we started out early on, I know because I was a closeted gay man at one time in my life, how important it was to be out in your own community. And so early on, we developed a program called the Latino Men's Group. And during the height of the men's group, the success stories, we were averaging over 99 men in men's conversations on a weekly basis, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And out of those 99 men, about 98% of those would take an HIV test every 6 months. And they would have it in our office. And we would have a number of sessions just to walk them through the entire process, which meant meals, prayer, conversation, and it became a familia. And that's how we, in our community, look at each other many times. Members consisted of men throughout LA County. It was interesting because we had Catholic priests, we had police officers, we had lawyers, doctors, we had people who were degreed or not degreed. We had people from the local community who all came into the room and shared their stories. The meetings were held in a self-discovery manner. And it was very successful because they got to learn from each other. We were highlighted in ABC World News Tonight on a national news program for the success rate of having our clients tested. And the intent of the group was to build leadership and to encourage HIV testing. We identified and recruited MSM, provided conversations about identity, cultural norms, homophobia, the role of faith in our lives, and built leadership development. We supported early on a gay softball team. Now, people would think, well, that's fun, that's sports. But early on in that league, GLASA, we were the only Latino softball team that was spreading the word and the messages around HIV testing and prevention. And we recruited a lot of the members of the league to our men's group meetings and our activities. Our men became so engaged in the organization that they took on the responsibility of doing outreach in their own community. And it wasn't just in West Hollywood at gay clubs. It was at traditional places where you had these Latino gay men at, Alvarez Street conducting, outreach events. We were the first organization to march in the Mexican Independence Day Parade in East Los Angeles, which at that time was the largest parade in the country. It gave them, and we were the first to have a person who dressed in drag and walked down the street with all of our members. And I want to just tell you, if you don't mind, and I'll speed up my presentation so I can tell you this little story, that the importance of having community support for HIV prevention, that early on, my founding board member, his name was Father John Santillan. He was a Catholic priest. And in one of our first parades, as we were marching down in East Los Angeles for the Mexican Independence Day Parade, we had about 45 people in the parade. And we had some that were dressed in drag, and we had some that were very robust, very macho, they were walking in the front of the banner. And I'll never forget the power of community, the power of faith leaders. As we're marching down the street, we heard from the side of the street some gang members, hardcore cholitos, yelling, putos, which is very derogatory towards gay men. And the Catholic priest turned around as he was riding in the car and waving to people. He turned around and he said, tu madre, which means your mother. And once he said that, I remember seeing the faces on those cholitos. They were scared and they kept quiet. And it was because their faith leader told them, basically egg them on and say, if you're going to call my folks queers or whores, male whores, then I'm going to call your mom. It's an even street. And that was the only time in the 12 years that we marched that we ever had any problems, that we were in the forefront of creating change on the east side of Los Angeles, because we brought people into march with us that were from the community and respected leaders. Next slide, please. So our programs, as we started back in 1993, our programs have grown. We have 2 offices, one in downtown Los Angeles. We're moving our Highland Park operation to Boyle Heights. We provide men's health. The men's health include HIV prevention and testing. We also provide a trans health around group discussions and testing. Non-binary health, we do the same thing. Substance abuse prevention, we do a lot of work in the Southeast and the downtown and Northeast Los Angeles. We also provide mental health services to the LGBTQ transitional age youth. And we also have a number of support groups for all of the different components. We also do COVID prevention education on the east side of Los Angeles and downtown and Northeast Los Angeles. Next slide. So, as we grew in our organization, we said to ourselves that HIV prevention and testing is not enough. It's hard when you look at, we're dealing with people who are coming into our organization who have alcohol issues, who may be homeless, those who have a mental health problem, those who are still dealing with homophobia. And so we wanted to expand our services to take care not only the LGBTQ, but the Latinx community. So we provide all these services that you see on our slide here. But we're also have an expertise in grassroots organizing. We went early on back in 1999 when we heard that the Tijuana Health Department was closing an AIDS hospice in Tijuana. Now, we were active and we were supporting that AIDS hospice. And the reason we were doing that we were noticing that our gay men, our Latino men, took a tremendous amount of pride in being of service to other community members. They got to see the situation in Tijuana, which was so dire. People were passing away so quickly from AIDS that they could never contact their relatives or family members. It was a very sad experience. So a lot of our members got involved and they started supporting that hospice. In 2000, that hospice was renamed after us, and it's called today Albergue Las Memorias. And it's a really testament to the determination and the will of our clients who became leaders. We also are leaders in the area of advocacy and grassroots mobilization. We were one of the key organizations who led an effort to defeat the 4 a.m. bar bill in Sacramento. That bill would have extended the drinking hours from 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, while a lot of folks in our gay community and business community advocated for such a bill to pass, and saying that the gay community has a right to party and be able to be at a nightclub until 3:30 in the morning that they chose, we said they have a right to do whatever they want, but it should not be legal. When we see the problems that we see in our own community around substance use and alcohol and drinking in the Latino community, where you go to the east side of Los Angeles, in the neighborhoods, every 6 blocks, you'll see a store selling alcohol or, liquor stores. And so we thought that was a huge issue. So we've been very much adamant about defeating new bills and new measures. We supported labor unions and workers. We have relationships and partnerships with Unite Here, those who serve the restaurant and hotel employees. One of the founding executive directors of that union was on our board of directors, who's now the chair of the Latina caucus in Sacramento. That's Maria Elena Durazo. And so it's really important for us to be involved and engaged in grassroots activities. And so that's one of the things that all of our staff members learn here at the WAL Las Memorias. Next slide, please. And so, I was told that in our conversation, what we wanted to share is, if I was suggesting, as I have done, I have been able to fly back to Minnesota and talk to a smaller organization, a Latino organization, about how do you build support for HIV prevention. It's important that, for me, I think that we need to assess our audience. We can't conduct HIV prevention and end the epidemic in a silo. It's got to be community-based. Everybody has to participate. Not everybody will agree, and it's okay that we don't agree or understand, but we have to be the patients, we have to be the teacher to be willing to teach our folks and lead them in the direction of ending the epidemic. So we have to assess our audience. We have to be inclusive of your outreach strategies, any outreach strategies that you think that will engage a community, to get people not only into testing, but to have the support of the family and neighborhoods and sports groups and schools to support those individuals who are trying to save their lives and become healthier in doing so. We have to understand where the communities are at. I say that because the WAL Las Memorias has held 15 years of faith-based conferences around HIV and AIDS. And the last year that we had the conference on faith and HIV, we had several Mormon leaders come into our group and they sat at the table. And I thought the first thing out of their mouth was going to be of bigotry or hatred. And they said, we may not agree with your lifestyle, but we're here to learn. And so we took that as a way of, okay, we can work together, we can be patient, and we can be creative. We have to understand people's culture and language. You know, Latinos often are lumped into one category, but there are several subgroups that we have to understand. There are Mexican Americans, there are Mexicanos, there are people from El Salvador or from Guatemala, there are people from South America. Although we may look the same and speak the same language, we have different cultural values. And we have to understand those communities so that we can be very inclusive. We need to create a base of supporters, volunteers, and like-minded people. In order to conduct campaigns, and those campaigns could be for HIV testing, could be about pride, it could be about mental health or substance use, but we have to be very holistic in our approach. Next slide. So as I was talking about being creative and outreach, build a coalition. I love coalitions. It's got to be a bottom-up approach, not a top-down. We got to build trust within those coalitions and again, respect community norms. We need to make HIV relevant to the community at large. I need to tell you that the Wall Las Memorias AIDS Monument created change for the Latino community in Los Angeles. It not only increased the conversation and awareness and education about HIV/AIDS, but it created the foundation for acceptance around our LGBTQ community. We also have to educate our community about HIV, human sexuality, health risks, and social justice. For me, you know, it is important that we look at our health issues and not just as health issues, but as health justice, because there's no reason why we are at our rate of HIV among young Latinos are increasing in this country. When we have, you know, PrEP and we have more acceptance of our queer individuals, our queer community, there's a lot of work that we need to do. We have to understand the level of our self-esteem of the target population and build upon it. You know, for most of our community, whether we're queer or where we're the immigrant queer who's unemployed or whose father is an alcoholic, who's divorced the mother, you know, we're dealing with self-esteem issues. And we need to focus on how do we build those individuals, those individual members, and then how do we build the self-esteem of the community? We need to promote community pride. And community pride is not just pride about LGBTQ. It's about pride about being who we are as Latino or Latinx. And so we need to participate in those conversations and in those celebrations. And then I like to say that it's important that we all create an event that all of our community can participate. And for us, this has been the Noche de las Memorias, which is on World AIDS Day, where we gather at the AIDS Monument in Lincoln Park, where the entire community comes out to commemorate those who passed. Next slide. So our first AIDS Monument was dedicated on World AIDS Day, December the 1st, 2004. It was a great event. We now are in process of renovating the AIDS Monument. It's almost complete. Next slide. Our monument was scheduled to be rededicated October 2nd, but we're actually looking at moving that to December 1st. Because of COVID-19, we don't want to put anybody's health at risk. And with the announcement that we will soon be able to have booster shots for all the community starting in October, we thought that this would be a lot more fitting. Next slide. And so I think as I close out my conversation here, it's important. The Wall Las Memorias has built coalitions not only with nonprofit organizations, but we built relationships with public health departments and statewide health departments. And so we many times are not only panelists, but we provide guidance on new programming. I want to take it and close out some of my conversation here today that, you know, I see the Wall Las Memorias and its members and its clients being agents of change. We have done that. You know, we are now in the second version of Act Now Against Meth. And some of the folks that on this Zoom here are part of this coalition. 15 organizations have come together to present recommendations to the LA County, and those will be made soon, around crystal meth in the areas of prevention, treatment, and policy. I'm proud of the work that we have done in building that coalition. It's the second time we've done it, and we've created change the first time back in 2006. We've also been able to change the way mental health department has done work. I talked about us providing prevention support to the TAY population in LA County. The way we got there, we had originally we had a grant from the endowment to work around mental health issues around LGBTQ young people in Boyle Heights. It was very successful. We had 49 participants for that 1 year. 90% of those identified as consumers of mental health. And so we worked with them, we trained them, we educated them. They went to the County Mental Health Commission and demanded action, that they fund LGBTQ programming. And so after that commission meeting, it was 1.5 years later, the mental health department came back with its first grant for mental health prevention to the LGBTQ community. I think that's really important, that we not only, it's important to advocate and get the services, but it's also important to work with those institutions to develop change. And knowing that institutions work very slow, we have been able to walk hand in hand to be able to create change and address the needs of our community. And so as I close this out, anybody who wants to submit a name to the AIDS Monument, this is open to anybody. Please log on here and submit these names. They will be unveiled sometime probably on World AIDS Day. And last slide. This is who I am. I have about 34 employees here at the Wall Las Memorias. We're looking to hire another 4 as we speak. It's a great place to be, both physically, mentally, emotionally, but also spiritually. Thank you for allowing me to be of service.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Richard. Thanks for sharing your story and the incredible work you do at the Wall. And I will be sure to share the name submission link with everyone after the session so folks have the opportunity to submit names for the monument as well. So now I'd like to invite all of our panelists to turn back on your cameras. I think you've all already done that. Thank you. For a little bit of panel discussion and Q&A. I'd like to start with a question that asks, if a person or organization wants to pursue grassroots strategies to end the HIV epidemic here in California, where would you recommend they start? And Chloe, I know you just went through this process last year with your organization, so maybe if you could help us get started on that question, how would you recommend folks get started in pursuing grassroots strategies?
Sure. I would say first and foremost, most importantly, to ensure that efforts are co-led with people and organizations that represent the communities that are being served. And also recognize the knowledge and the expertise that is necessary to engage effectively and in collaboration with community based organizations. I would also add to exercise patience, because a lot of nonprofit organizations like Alianza Translatinx, we're starting, and so a lot of the processes are not so easy for us to achieve, right? Also, I would exercise transparency and humility during the process of co-leading with community partners to ensure long-lasting and trusting partnerships with disproportionately impacted communities.
Thank you, Chloe. Gerald and Jamar, did you want to comment on that question as well? Where would you recommend folks get started if they want to pursue grassroots approaches?
Sure, I can add a few thoughts. Chloe, you spoke to that so well, so I'm actually just echoing a few thoughts, but particularly as it relates to co-leading is creating a safe space is a feeling. And so again, looking at the experience as a collaborative, building the dynamic with the culture of we are working together. I know some of the points Chloe mentioned is the need for patience and such. And again, those relational components is the strongest foundation that can be built as it relates to co-leading. So creating those spaces for folks to feel seen, to feel heard, to recognize they are co-collaborators, and also to value their insight and contribution. And so that is not only just value in the sense of creating a space of value, but looking at how can we institutionally support folks for their contributions, their time. And like Chloe mentioned, also a great deal of the most passionate folks are volunteers or being sort of very nominally stipend. So we should be looking at how we building structures to support our co-leaders as they are giving so much of their time, their passion, and quite honestly, their lives.
Yes, and I would like to just mimic both what Chloe and Gerald said, but something that has always stuck out to me, and Richard, you mentioned this in your presentation, is that funding becomes one of those big issues, and I think even for AHMAD, the organization was in existence before there was real funding. And so sometimes we have to start where we are, and that means just to get started, and so with the work that we do, we know that it's valuable and that we're expertise in these things, but sometimes it takes, just like Chloe said, some patience. Sometimes your patience lasts for years, until you do get those funding sources. But to continue, just continuing doing what you are doing because it's relevant and needed.
I just want to add, I think what Chloe is doing is symbolic of what you do in building community, is that when you have a volunteer base, they come around the table and they have meals and they have conversations, and then there's a plan of action, and you build upon the people around that table. You bring more people to that table, and you share the challenges, you share the responsibility. And before you know it, it becomes 100 people, right? And then you continue that, with the people who have funding, right? And you continue along that way. The other thing I need to say that I think it's important, especially for the younger leadership in this room. I envisioned where we were going many years ago, but I was also afraid. I was afraid many times because when I spoke about things and people looked at me and says, what are you saying? I think it's important for our young leaders to be able to trust their vision and to know that being a visionary is not always easy, because the journey sometimes could have some hurdles, but you have to be patient and you have to be loving. I share this because there's a movie that was out many years ago with Kevin Costner, The Field of Dreams. And I love that. I love his saying about building a stadium, a ball field in the middle of farmland in Iowa. And it was his vision, right? And you build it and they will come. You build your organization, you build the cause, you stay focused, you do whatever, people will come. So I think that's my message.
Thank you so much. Gerald and Jamar, I'm wondering if you can start us off on this next question, which is, what are some of the strengths and some of the challenges that you face in serving members of your own community, where you might be kind of having dual relationships with some of the folks that you serve as members of that same community? How do you and your colleagues manage that? And again, what are some of those strengths and challenges of this approach?
I'll start, and I'm sure Gerald can give more on this, but I think that one of those things are just building very strong boundaries. Sometimes when you live, act, and play in the same communities, it definitely can be a challenge. But some of those things is at our organization, we really have very strong boundaries, and then we let people, just be themselves as well. Just because I'm a member of the community doesn't mean I know all the answers in the community. Doesn't mean that I'm the only expert in the room. And I think everyone from their lived experiences, especially when you work and live and are professional in that community, we all have something to bring to the table. And one of my things is that, I'm Jamar 24/7, but you get a different version of Jamar between 8 to 6. I'll give you some of the same characteristics, the personality of who I am, but I do have a built-in boundary system that says this conversation might need to be tabled, or this might need to be tabled into after 6 thing. And I think those have really helped mold our relationships. And I think community also, because like we said, we hire from within our community. So, they're able to say, hey, I can show up as my whole self person in this space and don't be criticized for being who I am.
That's great, Jamar. I completely agree. I'll add to that also from my own experience. It is very clear and effective communications also with setting those boundaries. Going back to a point around sort of effective relationship building, sometimes folks might not realize, what boundaries mean sort of universally. So being able to sort of speak very clearly to what that means and looks like, also sort of collectively defining what our success looks like. And with that sort of reshapes the dynamic. I think, when you go in sort of, with too many rigid structures, it sort of sets the tone. So I think looking at how do we make this most effective together, and that speaks to roles, responsibility, accountability, and again, starting to speak the same language. I say all the time that effective communication is both sending and receiving messages. And so you have to understand it the way that I'm saying it and vice versa. So I think that's really key. And then also extending grace and teachable moments. Sometimes we'll see often where, they might get a little too comfortable, a little sketchy, a little dicey. And, going back to those foundational conversations and being able to say, our collective responsibility here is this, and this type of exchange doesn't lead to that. So how can we make sure this doesn't happen going forward? So again, I think it goes back to, to echo Jamar's point around boundaries, but also the effective communication that comes with it, and then the culture of collaboration that comes with boundaries also, because it leans to our collective success when there are boundaries.
Thank you so much. I am sad to see that we have 2 minutes left. I wish we could chat for so much longer, but I just wanted to be sure to ask this one other question before we close. And Richard, I'll send this question over to you. So in your experience, I know that all of these organizations have worked in partnership with local public health agencies in different ways and at different times. Richard, in your experience, what can each type of organization, the grassroots organization and the public health agency, uniquely bring to a partnership to address the HIV epidemic?
I think that's a good question, and I think there's a deep answer. I think one is the understanding of process and the institution. As a nonprofit, as a group of people, we have to understand who we're talking to and how they come up with their ideas and their plans, right? And then respect that. And then as we respect that, we also need to hold on to our own identity as leaders in our community and our own experiences, and then have conversation with public health leaders about programs, about challenges, obstacles, about all of our great successes. And I think we also need to talk up our successes to public health, whether it's here or whether it's in the federal level, because they don't really have a clue. They're inundated, with work and with bureaucracy, that we need to be in the forefront. So I think understanding, just communicating and respecting, and then building a trusting relationship. So many of the public health people get burned, just like many times community people get burned. We have to focus on building a trusting relationship.
Thank you so much. I know we have a couple of other questions in the Q&A box. I'll be working with our panelists who are so gracious to kind of follow up on those last few questions we weren't able to get to during the discussion today. But I just wanted to take this last minute to thank all of our panelists again for sharing your wonderful work and your wisdom with our Learning Collaborative community. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I also wanted to thank everyone on the line this morning for your great participation, and also our fantastic technical support team, Nick and Enrique, thank you so much. As usual, please look out for a follow-up email from me later today with relevant information from the session and a link to the evaluation form, and I'll also post the recording and slides on our CHIPS website by early next week. So thank you all again so much, and see you next time.
Bye.
Everyone.